Most businesses, they're obsessed with one thing, making the sale. But according to Alexander Chernev, a marketing professor at Northwestern University, the real game, the one that really defines long-term success, that actually starts after the transaction is complete. He calls it the consumption game, and it's all about mastering what your customers do with your product after they've brought it home.
So let me ask you this. A customer just bought your product. Is your job done? If your gut reaction is, yeah, of course, well, you might be leaving a huge amount of value on the table. See, the purchase isn't the finish line, it's the starting gun. And ignoring what happens next is one of the most common and most expensive mistakes a business can make.
So here's the playbook we're going to walk through. First, we'll break down the core challenge. Then we'll dive into the two powerful levers you can pull, the usage occasion and the consumption quantity. After that, we'll get specific with mastering replacement frequency, and finally, we'll wrap it all into a playbook you can use.
All right, so let's dive right into the heart of the challenge. Once a customer buys something from you, what they do next isn't just random chance. It's actually a series of decisions. Decisions that you can absolutely guide and influence if you have the right strategy.
Look, it really all boils down to two simple questions that every customer answers, whether they think about it or not. When am I going to use this, and how much of it am I going to use? Now, these might seem like small details, but they are the two critical decision points that set the entire pace for your business, from how often people buy again to whether they become loyal customers.
Okay, so this is the first big lever you get to pull, defining the usage occasion. This isn't about just hoping your customers find a time to use your product. It's about you, the business, actively connecting your product to a specific and ideally a very frequent moment in their lives.
And wow, if you want a perfect example of what happens when you get this wrong, just look at the story of Michelob. They started out as this premium, first-class beer just for special occasions, which right away limits how much people drink. So then they just started throwing things at the wall. Where you are going. What does that even mean? Then weekends were made for Michelob. Okay, that's better, but you've just told people not to drink your beer 5 days a week. Every new slogan just confused people more and diluted what the brand stood for. It is a classic cautionary tale.
And what Michelob's story really shows us is this fundamental strategic mistake. You can't build a habit on something that doesn't happen very often. An even crazier example is Corvel Champagne. They tried to own New Year's Eve. The problem is, habits are built on repetition. An occasion that only happens once a year is a terrible, terrible foundation to build on. People already have their go-to champagne, and one party isn't going to change that.
Okay, now for a brand that absolutely nailed its positioning, maybe a little too well. This line, "Pardon me, would you have any Grey Poupon?" It's iconic. It perfectly established Grey Poupon as the height of sophistication for mustard, and sales just took off. But here's the catch. After a while, sales flatlined. And the problem was their own success. People saw it as this fancy special occasion mustard, so that jar would just sit in the back of the fridge for months. So they had to pivot. And pivot they did. Grey Poupon was smart enough to see the problem and completely shifted their strategy. They brought out squeezable bottles and changed their messaging to turn Grey Poupon from a rare treat into an everyday luxury. They kept the quality, but they completely changed the occasion. All right, so that's lever one. Now let's grab the second lever, because this is where things get really interesting. Once you've established when your product gets used, the next frontier is influencing how much of it gets used in that moment. This is all about consumption quantity.
This all comes down to a really powerful quirk in our brains called the reference point principle. Basically, the size of the container tells us how much we're supposed to use. There was this incredible study. They gave people at the movies these huge buckets of stale, just awful popcorn, and they still ate way more than the people with smaller buckets. Why? Because that giant bucket became their reference point for a normal amount to eat.
And you know who understood this principle perfectly? Pepsi. This was the key to one of their biggest wins in the Cola Wars. Back in the 70s, they were in that endless battle with Coke, just desperately looking for an advantage.
Now, the easy move, the obvious thing to do, would have been to make a fancier bottle, right? Something that looked better on the shelf. But this young exec, John Scully, he had this aha moment. He realized the real battle wasn't won in the store aisle, it was won in the home. The more soda people had in their fridge, the more they'd drink. It wasn't about shelf appeal, it was about how fast they'd go through it at home. And that simple, powerful idea led directly to the 2-liter bottle, an innovation that completely changed the game.
And it's not just about how big the package is. The design of the product itself can be a total bottleneck, or it can be an accelerator. I mean, there is no better example than the old glass Heinz ketchup bottle.
You know the drill, right? Shaking it, smacking the bottom, it was a pain. And that naturally slowed down how much you used. The solution? The upside-down squeezable bottle. It wasn't just more convenient. It got rid of all that friction and actively sped up how much ketchup people put on their food.
But of course, the most legendary example of guiding quantity is this. Procter & Gamble didn't change a single drop of the shampoo. They didn't change the bottle. All they did was add one little word to the instructions on the back: repeat. And just like that, they trained a whole generation of people to double the amount of shampoo they use every single time. It's an absolute masterclass.
Okay, let's zoom in on a really specific and frankly very profitable piece of this puzzle: replacement frequency. We're talking about things that get used up one at a time. Think water filters, razor blades, that kind of thing. It's all about mastering when the next purchase happens.
And the problem here is a double whammy. First, when your customers forget to replace these things, they get a worse experience. The water doesn't taste as good, the shave isn't as close. And second, for the company, every single day a customer is using an old, worn-out product is a day you're not making a sale. There's a total lose-lose.
So what's the brilliant solution? You stop making the customer guess. You stop relying on their memory, and instead, you build the replacement signal right into the product itself. These are called usage markers. Oh, and you've seen these everywhere, I guarantee it. The little timer on a Brita filter, the blue indicator strip on a razor blade that fades, the toothbrush bristles that change color. They're all designed to do one thing: tell you it's time to buy a new one. But, and this is the key takeaway here, the marker by itself isn't enough. You have to actually teach your customers what it means. A lot of people have no idea what that colored strip on their razor is for. So education has to go hand in hand with the marker.
All right, so let's tie all this together. What's the playbook here? This is all about shifting your mindset from just making the sale to actively managing the entire post-purchase journey. It's about taking control instead of leaving it all to chance.
At the end of the day, it really just comes down to pulling these two incredibly powerful levers. First, you have to actively define a frequent usage occasion in your customer's life. Don't be Corbel on New Year's Eve. Be Grey Poupon on a Tuesday afternoon sandwich. And second, you have to intentionally design your product and your packaging to guide how much people use. Turn those bottlenecks, like the old ketchup bottle, into accelerators.
And that really leaves just one big, critical question on the table for you. Take a hard look at your own business. Think about when your customers are using your product, how much they're using, and when they're supposed to replace it. What parts of that journey are you actively managing? And what consumption decisions are you currently and perhaps dangerously leaving up to chance?